Welcome, guys, to the process. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a wonderful Wednesday. Alessandra, how are you?
I'm doing great, phenomenal this evening. I hope everybody is doing well. And thanks for everybody that RSVP to the show tonight. We've already seen people in the comments. I really appreciate the feedback.
And today, Black History in Surgery. So, guys, we have a good show planned out for you. Stay tuned and listen to this beautiful intro. We'll be right back. So, guys, welcome to The Process, a sterile processing industry podcast providing education and real world conversation related to sterile processing compliance. Thank you for joining us tonight. And as you have seen, guys, our topic is Black History in Surgery. Alessandra, let's kick it off for this greatly anticipated show.
Ah. So we really wanted to take a deep dive and just kind of ask ourselves, what do we know about Black contributions to surgical services and infection control? So we took it all the way back to Africa to start. And the first person that we're profiling is actually an Egyptian priest king named Imhotep. And he actually trained and is guided as the father of medicine, as he trained Hippocrates, who we know we got our Hippocratic oath from, to do no harm. So before we got that great mind from the Greeks, he studied under Imhotep in Egypt. He reigned from 2630 2611 BCE, and he was the second king of the third dynasty of Egypt. And they worked to develop many natural medicines. So there were many natural and herbal cures that came out of this time, as well as some surgical tools. Most of us are pretty familiar that the Egyptians were involved in mummification and were very concerned about the spirit life after death. And they developed surgical tools as such, like things to help remove the brain through the nose after death. So they brought us many, many, many medical gifts, including training some of the first physicians of the world.
That's very interesting. Way back when they did that?
Way back when. And you may or may not be familiar, but ancient Egyptians actually referred to their country as Kemet, which is
Mhm.
known as the Black Land. And that represented the black and fertile land of the Nile that brought to them sediments came during the year. And so we actually refer to it as Kemet.
Kemet is Egypt. All right, that's very interesting. Very interesting. What else you have for us?
So something else connected to West Africa. Our next
Mm,
person that we took a look at was Onisimus. And Onisimus was a West African slave that is believed to have been originated around Ghana or somewhere on the Ivory Coast. And he was brought over and ended up working in Boston and was able to lend knowledge. This was actually common knowledge in West Africa about how to help with inoculation. But he gave this knowledge to one of his slave owners at the time. And what they were taught to do was to take a small amount of pus from an infected person and put it into a small incision into a non-infected person. And of course, being that they would be allowed to build up an immune response to smallpox. And so he's actually credited with saving colonial Boston at the time that was because the East Coast was being hit with a major smallpox outbreak. Something else I thought was really interesting about Onesimus, and this was around 1721, was that he actually worked in his what they called his free time to save money, and he bought his own freedom. And after he bought his freedom, they actually in Boston required all freedmen to work for free in the city to help compensate for the loss of slave labor in the city. And so he still participated in building up much of colonial Boston at the time, even as a free man.
wow, hold up, bring it back. So they took pus from somebody with smallpox put it in somebody without smallpox, and that basically inhibited the smallpox from manifesting in the person without it.
So what it did was it allowed people to have a small reaction rather than being met with a full outbreak of smallpox. And so that let their immune system get used to it, build up defenses, and that way when and if they were exposed to smallpox, they did not have the same deadly reaction as was sweeping the East Coast at the time.
Hmm. It's very interesting.
Indeed. Very interesting
Very,
and very
very,
important.
very. And would I want it done to me? I do not know at that time.
Well, you have
Um,
to think again, there were no vaccinations for smallpox at the time. And it was much, much more, I would say, a scarier pandemic in the sense that, we're used to what we're going through now with COVID, which has claimed many lives, but smallpox at the time was doing a major damage. So some of us have chosen to get vaccinated. There's that option. But at the time, this was your best bet. And it worked incredibly well. Colonial Boston thwarted many, many deaths.
and so go kudos to those African Americans and black people in general from different nations who contributed to definitely helping prevent a lot of those outbreaks in those days where the science wasn't really science, but it was basically evidence of good practice or practice. It was basically
Well,
practice in medicine.
what it was cultural medicine.
Right, right,
This was knowledge that was passed down from ancestors on how to use different herbs and teas and tinctures. And so, like you said, modern medicine hadn't necessarily been invented to certify any of this knowledge,
right.
but
Mhm.
cultures have been surviving for thousands of years on this knowledge.
Now, if someone were to do that today, they
Do
would be
what?
considered crazy.
Oh, to expose you to a small amount of disease?
Yes.
I don't think
Why?
so. I think it's just been tucked into our healthcare so much that we don't really notice when it happens to us. Like to
Mm,
work in healthcare, we all have to have a full vaccination card. And each time we get those vaccines, generally what's happening is we're being exposed to a small amount of that disease in order to build a response.
true, true. And it's not with a spoon or or
Right.
maybe our someone's fingers, poking in us, and
Yeah.
it's a little more technical. You get a syringe, you draw it out. It's in a little bottle.
Right.
It's a little, it's more aseptically pleasing
It's a
now.
little more aseptically pleasing. We also have things like anesthesia that have been invented. So definitely, I always imagine what it was like to have medieval healthcare, and wonder, what it's like to have surgery without anesthesia, or what it's like to, experience dental care with
Oh
with
my goodness,
nothing.
that's the worst one.
Yes. And we had some pictures also of some of the Egyptian tools that they used at that time. And one of the things that I saw was a dental drill where they were actually able to do some extractions. So, one of
Mhm.
the big painkillers they used at the time was opium that was chewed up and used as a painkiller.
Hmm. Interesting. Very interesting.
Pretty
I
cool.
see some of these tools in the. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I am just kidding.
Well, don't quit too much because actually, our next person, you do see their tools in surgery still today.
And who is that?
So the next person we're covering is actually a person's, and this was three enslaved women named Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsy. And Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsy were enslaved by the gynecologist named Marion J. Sims. And Marion J. Sims, we might be familiar with the Sims vaginal retractor, which we definitely still use in practice today. And Marion J. Sims is also regarded to as the father of gynecology. And one of the ways that he was able to obtain that prestige was by having his slaves do surgery in what he had was an operating room at the time. It was a shack in the back of his house where he was said to have dreams about procedures and then wake up in the middle of the night and bring the slaves out to the quarters and do surgery on them with no asepsis and no anesthesia. He was able to invent surgical tools like the Sims vaginal retractor, as well as procedures like that used to close vaginal fistulas. And he is said to have been recorded to do some 30 plus surgeries on each of the women across their lifetimes. And he documented this in his journals. And then the other key thing that stood out to me in researching Marion J. Sims and learning the stories of Lucy, Anarcha, and Betsy was that Marion J. Sims is also thought to be the father of the modern thought that Black people don't feel pain, as he
Mhm.
often wrote in his journals that although his slaves endured pain, they had a higher threshold than that of their white counterparts. And this is something that has stuck in the medical field for a very long time.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. I was reading up on that, and that just seems so strange to me, and including the ratio of death during birth and just the practice of how um, African American women or colored women, Black women are treated um, when when declaring that they feel something or they have pain or they have a headache or they have any kind of trauma. It's perceived differently when um, someone from a different race says the same thing. So
Absolutely. I mean, we have to take into consideration that a lot of these people that we're talking about were involved in training the next generation. So imagine a Marion J. Sims training, other fellow physicians and explaining to them that his slaves are willing to do surgery with no anesthesia, that there's no need to care or be concerned about their pain or repeat procedures. If they die, it's okay, just get a new one. I mean, having those type of thought processes in your culture, it's going to show up. And we do see it evident in data today. It's common, like you said, common knowledge that Black women have disproportionate health outcomes that are most often not believed when they're complaining of pain or different concerns about their care. So it's important for us to take a look back and understand where some of these thoughts may have come from.
and we do have a short video to play based on Dr. Sims and his practices. So take a look at this one.
With slavery, doctors relied on slave owners for financial stability. They accompanied plantation masters to auctions to verify the fitness of slaves and were called in to treat sick slaves to protect their owners' investments. In 1807, Congress abolished the importation of slaves and in turn pushed Black women to have more children, to essentially breed slaves. Founding father Thomas Jefferson later wrote, "I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man on the farm." Around the 1830s, the abolitionist movement led to the rise of what was called Negro Medicine, or efforts to identify Black inferiority to justify slavery. And there were polygenists who tried to use both science and the Bible to find proof that races evolve from different origins. The 1830s also marked the beginning of recorded experimentation on Black women's bodies. One doctor performed experimental C-sections on slaves. Another one perfected the dangerous ovariotomy, or removal of an ovary by testing the procedure on slave women. In fact, half the original articles in the 1836 Southern Medical and Surgical Journal dealt with experiments on Black people. And then, of course, there was James Marion Sims, whose reputation is etched in history and on that statue in Central Park. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims began performing experimental surgeries on a 17-year-old slave named Anarcha. He eventually performed 30 operations on Anarcha and more surgeries on about 11 other female slaves. When his male colleagues could no longer bear to assist him in inflicting pain on the women, the slaves took turns restraining one another. Yet paintings depicting Sims, Anarcha, and other slave women presented a subdued version of his experiments. Even though anesthesia was introduced in 1846, Sims chose not to use it for his experimentation with slaves. His practices echoed one of the most prevalent and dangerous beliefs in medicine at the time, that Black people did not feel pain or anxiety. This book from 1851, titled The Natural History of Human Species, claimed the American dark races bear with indifference tortures insupportable to a white man. Studies released as recently as last year demonstrate that Black people are less likely to be treated for pain, particularly in the ER. There's even one from a children's hospital that found the same to be true for kids. And just this year, Pearson Education, a leading educational publisher, issued an apology and recalled nursing textbooks that included racist stereotypes, like this section that said Black people often report higher pain intensity than other cultures.
Well, what does it mean when you say
Wow.
All right.
We'll definitely have to drop the link if you want to finish the video.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put the link in the comments so that we can definitely help others research that on their own.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting throughout doing the research and prep for the show too was just seeing how much of this is still being rectified. Like we saw at the end of that video, that textbooks were starting to be redrafted, and also I saw that the Marion Gem statue in Central Park had also been removed. So history is starting to catch up with some of these concepts.
That is so good. I was wondering about that statue. I didn't see if it was removed. I heard about it earlier during that process where they were taking down those statues that were a little controversial, those slave owners, etc., etc. So I was wondering, did his statue get taken down?
Yes, it did. It was eventually removed from Central Park.
Good. So what are we going into next?
All right. So next we have Mary Mahoney. And Mary Mahoney was actually a nurse. And she was the first professionally certified nurse that was allowed to complete a professional certification. A lot of the reading that we saw in this time period, and this was 1879 when she was. I'm sorry, 1845 when she was the first one to graduate. But during this time, we found that a lot of people were just simply not allowed to participate in schools. And people like Mary Mahoney went on to make some of the first schools that actually were predominantly for African Americans to join the profession. Something else that I thought was particularly special about Mary Mahoney was that she was also very active in the women's suffrage movement of the time. And she became one of the first women in general, and and among the first African American women to register to vote in Boston at the time.
That is excellent. Thank you, Mary, for being a pioneer.
Absolutely. She also participated in helping the founding of the Provident Hospital, which we'll talk about a little later.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Very, very cool. So, who are we going into next? Are we going to Daniel?
Next, we're talking about Daniel.
Oh, my goodness. Let's get into Daniel Hale Williams. Daniel Hale Williams was an African American general surgeon who was one of the first physicians in the U.S. to perform open heart surgery. Hale performed a successful pericardium surgical procedure in 1893 to repair a left fifth costal cartilage wound on a patient. Without modern-day penicillin and blood transfusions, the success of the 1893 procedure marked Williams as the second physician in the U.S. to complete the procedure. So thank you to Mr. Williams.
Absolutely. He was also a part of helping to found the first African American hospital in Chicago, Provident Hospital.
Yeah.
That was also a nursing school.
Yeah. Williams is also credited with being the founder of the nation's first non-segregated hospital, Chicago's Provident Hospital, as you said. Originally from Pennsylvania, Williams became an apprentice for a physician after moving to Janesville, Wisconsin, to run a barber shop with one of his 5 sisters. Williams was enthralled with the work of Dr. Henry W. Palmer and continued to follow him for 2 years until he attended Chicago Medical College, which is now known as the Northwestern University Medical School, which was changed in 1880. So thank you, Mr. Williams. A nice little tidbit of his history, where he went to school, and what he did before he became a doctor.
Yeah.
So who are we going into next?
Next, we're going into Charles Drew.
Mr. Charles Drew. All right, Charles Drew. Charles Drew was known as a pioneer of blood transfusions. He was responsible for the first blood banks and what became the American Red Cross Blood Bank. Drew was responsible for setting up and administering an early program for blood storage and preservation in the 1940s, before the U.S. joined World War II. His job was to collect, test, and transport large amounts of blood plasma to be distributed in the UK. He later went to start blood mobiles that were trucks with refrigeration units that stored blood. This allowed blood to be transported much earlier. Drew went to medical school at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, and later did graduate work at Columbia University, where he went to receive his Doctor of Medical Science degree. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate that, Mr. Drew. I like to see men coming up, doing different things, being innovative, and that certainly was one of the great guys. And that's not even too long ago. So he didn't. I think I didn't even know. I didn't know that African Americans played a role in terms of medicine in those days, or were actually credited for making those strides in medicine. So thank you. Big kudos to Mr. Drew for Charles Drew for making those strides.
Absolutely. And I mean, not only did we find that they were a part of the bedrock and foundation of a lot of medical advancement, but that they also did that while simultaneously advocating for themselves, because they were facing a lot of racism, being barred from, taking positions, from even joining schools. So a lot of their work was about advocating for themselves and their communities.
Mm-hmm. And one of the main things where they actually got a chance to go to school and get that education too, which was very rare at the time.
Yes, breaking barriers for sure.
Mm-hmm. So next we'll go into Otis Boykin. Otis Boykin was credited with inventing a control unit for the artificial cardiac pacemaker that uses electrical impulses to maintain a regular heartbeat. Boykin invented a wire precision resistor that was used in the control unit for pacemakers. He graduated from Fisk University in 1941 and became a lab assistant at Majestic Radio and TC Corporation in Chicago. That's a little bit about Mr. Boykin. What we now have today as a pacemaker, he was very instrumental in helping create. So
I thought his backstory was really interesting because his mother died of a heart attack when he was 1, I believe.
Wow.
And that's what led him to have such an interest in pacemakers in general.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. We'll go into Mr. Samuel Hunts. Samuel Hunts? How am I saying that wrong? Can you pronounce the last name for me, please?
Samuel Counts.
Samuel Counts developed the Belzer kidney perfusion machine that preserves a kidney for up to 50 hours from the time it was removed from the donor's body. The device is standard equipment in today's hospitals and laboratories. Counts was also the first to perform a successful kidney transplant between two humans who weren't twins. He also discovered that large doses of methylprednisolone, am I saying that right? Methylprednisolone. Am I saying that right? I don't know.
I have
I don't
no
know. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so he also discovered that large doses of methylprednisolone, a steroid drug, could reverse acute rejection of kidneys that were transplanted. He started his surgical training at Stanford University School of Medicine, where he studied the field of organ transplantation and decided to specialize in transplant surgery. So that's Mr. Boykin's story. And very interesting, very interesting. Transplant. I always wondered how, and I have I have a little more knowledge on it now. How the organ um, was able to be viable after being out the body for so long, taking a plane ride, going on a vehicle ride, walking through the through the facility, and how were you able to transplant that and get it to start back up? That was so crazy to me. But then later on, I learned that when someone dies, their organs stay alive for up to days later. I believe so. Yeah, yeah,
Gotta do
yeah.
some
I
research on
think
that.
days. Yeah, yeah. Like if I could be wrong.
It's
I
super
could be
major
wrong.
that he was able to take the leap from being able to do the transplant to being able to have two people that were not related at all be
Mm-hmm,
able to receive each other's organs.
mm-hmm. And that's and I'm wondering what's the difference. What was the perception of it having to be twins and going move taking that leap from not being twins to just being random strangers with the same blood type.
Well, transplant surgery, even among family members, is extremely complicated. I mean, it's sounds like part of his work was just working on rejection therapy. So, to me, it's mind-boggling to think about them being some of the first people to figure this stuff out.
Right,
Where,
right.
where now you get a book and you read about what Samuel Counts was able to discover.
Yeah, and you're thinking about if I didn't have a twin, I couldn't get a transplant.
Yeah.
So that is very, very interesting. So we're going to go. I'm going to go into one more guy.
Oh, please wait a minute.
Hold
You
up.
left out Leonidas. You skipping over
Oh, my
Alexa.
bad, my bad. I apologize. I apologize.
All right. So next up is Leonidas Harris
Thank you
Berry.
for. Hold on. Thank you for Leslie for tuning in, and Joshua Loman. Thank you also for tuning in, and we'll get back to your comments in a little bit. But
Thank you
appreciate it.
guys. All right. So Leonidas was a gastroenterologist, and he was the first Black physician at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. And Chicago, Boston, and the California area seem to be extremely pivotal in African Americans being able to push the envelope in the medical field at the time. And so he wrote very heavily and spoke out a lot about the racism that he faced in his time as working as a physician at this hospital, and as well as the fact that it was blocking him from receiving an attending position there for several years beyond his qualification. And so in 1946, he began speaking out about that, and he actually was not awarded a faculty position until 1963. And so after he was awarded that position in 1963, he remained in a faculty position until he left the medical field. And I really enjoyed researching Leonidas because he has a direct connection to the area that I grew up in, which is Southern Illinois. And a lot of his work, if for those of you that are not familiar, Southern Illinois is the tip of Illinois, which everybody's very familiar with Chicago, which is what is very up north. It's about 5-6 hours difference. And so it's very rural down in Southern Illinois. The closer you get to where he was helping, which was called Cairo, Cairo actually sits right at the bottom where the rivers connect. And so it's very much a poverty area. Like actually the town that I grew up in just got listed as the #1 poverty town in
Oh
Illinois,
boy,
making the
not
list for
good.
all the wrong reasons.
Not good. Not
Not
good.
good, but people like Dr. Leonidas Harris Berry put together programs like the Flying Black Medics that flew down from Chicago periodically to come to Cairo and provide medical education and training and care. He also was a part of another program called United Front, which provided monetary resources and help to people that faced racist, physically violent, and racist attacks in the area. And one last fact about the area is that it was a host to places called Sundown Towns, which you can definitely drop a link for this too. You can just type it into Google. But the area that I grew up in is about 45 minutes north of Cairo. And about 15 minutes south of us is a sundown town. And so essentially what that meant was it was a warning to African Americans not to be in the town after sundown, or they might be subjected to violence, to racial violence. And so it was very prevalent in the area. And he made it his business to support people that had been racially attacked.
Interesting. And I know you're proud. I don't know how to
Illinoisan.
pronounce it. Illinoisan, right? Illinois. That's why I was shaking
Very
my
much.
head. I'm like, every time she talk about Illinois, she always like, yeah, I'm proud of being Illinois. So that's good. That's good.
Yes,
very good.
Illinois has a very rich history, African American history, and as well as American. We have one of the first Civil War cemeteries. One of the first Memorial Day events took place here. There's all types of history. Black Panthers from Chicago and Illinois. So
Very nice. She's smiling. She likes Illinois. I gotta visit there
Hey,
just on the regular.
check it out.
Check it out. The good parts.
The good part. Just don't be in there now.
Don't get caught
They
up in that.
swear they've changed. But,
It's getting better. It's getting better.
And no small part to people that do activism like this, because I'm sure it was not an easy thing to fund. Paying for all those doctors to fly down from the city to come to somewhere like Southern Illinois where it's not a city. Let's just say that.
Okay.
It's not a city. All right. So the next person that we took a look at was Alexa Irene Kennedy. And she is actually still living and still very active in advocating for women in medicine, as well as African American women in neurosurgery. So she was the first African American female neurosurgeon in the U.S. in 1981. So this was just a few years before I was born. So as Deannard said, this is a very recent history. And one of the things that she talked about as far as how she was able to imagine herself as how she was able to get herself as a neuroscientist. And she said that the greatest challenge that she faced in becoming a neurosurgeon was believing that it was possible. So education was very important to Alexa. She was very big on books and travel. She worked as an intern at Yale. And when she was in high school, she was very advanced as a student. She graduated high school in 2 years. She attended a summer camp as a high school student, actually ended up getting printed in a paper as she developed a mathematical equation to chart the growth of cancer cells in high school.
Interesting.
Right. So she went on to graduate cum laude. She became a chief at 36 at Children's Hospital Michigan. She also worked and fellowshipped at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in pediatric neurosurgery. And she retired from the field in 2001 and moved to Florida to try to kick her feet up, and found that there were no pediatric neurologists where she lived. So she went back into practice and retired again in 2012. And now she works as an advocate, trying to get more women into medicine.
Excellent. Like that. That's a nice story. And plus, she came to Philly. I also like that. But
fellowshipped in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Very interesting. And shout out to Black women making the effort, going against all odds. As you know, you have multiple obstacles to go through. being African American, being a female, being a mother, being a daughter, auntie. It's like
All the hats.
all the hats you have, trying to juggle and still trying to build a successful career. So kudos.
Yeah. It's definitely challenging facing that opposition. I just wonder how women like Mary Mahoney in the beginning were able to just stand their ground when people are discounting you because you're female, and then discounting you again because you're African American, when you're obviously absolutely capable of doing anything. Not only did she graduate, but she helped build institutions throughout her career. All right.
And
So I have
hold on. At least one for the show. Yep, had to do one. I had to drop one. I had to drop one, and also.
and yep. At that moment.
And guys, try to hop on to that YouTube channel, hit that like and subscribe button, and also hit that notification bell. Get your little pinky finger, that little bell in the top right corner. Pep, just tap it, and you will be notified every time we have a new show or any new content coming on. So our numbers have been growing. So don't get left out. Just hit the subscribe. I know you don't subscribe to many channels, but this one is worth it. Please subscribe. And we appreciate the support. Thank you.
I also want to just shout out the folks that have sent emails this week. I know I have a few more to get back to, but appreciate you guys reaching out. I know there's at least one person that has signed up to take sterile processing classes after watching the process. So congratulations on taking the next step. We appreciate it.
We do.
All right. So I have one more powerful African American physician. Her name was Patricia Era Bath. And Patricia Bath is actually not only a surgeon, but an inventor as well. She invented the laser phaco handpiece that we know and love in our cataract surgeries. And so Patricia was another one that was just very extremely advanced in school. She was published at a very early age. She became a physician in 1968 after graduating. She became the first in 1981. And she developed the laser phaco handpiece. Something that stood out to me with Patricia Bath was she actually conducted her own study in ophthalmology as to why African Americans were having such a high instance of cataracts at the time. And what she found through doing community study was essentially that they did not have access to adequate care. So she developed what is known now as the community ophthalmology program that is widely practiced internationally to provide ophthalmological care to patients in need. And then also created the phaco handpiece. So if you're not familiar with the phaco, the way that it works is it is a laser, and it will vaporize the cataracts inside the eye using the laser. And so it makes now for that to be a very minimally invasive surgery that has a very quick recovery.
Surgery center.
There you go.
Great. And is she still around?
She is definitely that, still active in the community. And with those phacos, I just, just because we are still a processing show, I do want to remind you, check the IFUs on those phacos and make sure that you have them under a preventative maintenance program.
We will.
Please.
We will definitely check those IFUs. And if the IFUs don't tell us what we need, we call the manufacturer and we say, can you be more clear on what we need to do?
Please.
Please.
As best you can. One of the troubles with eye surgery is the instruments don't change a lot. And so they don't get bought often. They get used well beyond their useful life. So just check that out. And if you need help with it, you can always reach out.
Please reach out. Who are we going to next, Alessandra?
That's all of the heavy hitters that I have on my list.
Woo! So we're going into, his name is, kind of similar to mine, and that we'll keep that a secret. So we'll go into, and then we're going to something a lot of people will like. Now, this is an advancement. There are a lot of people out there will be like, "Oh my God, this is the best. We saved the best for the end, not the end, but close to the Well, you know what I mean. We saved the best anyway. So here it is. Who's this guy? His name is Manly West. So who's Manly West? Okay, so let me give you a short backstory. So, glaucoma is estimated to affect 3% of Jamaica's population. So, Mr. West is from Jamaica, hence the name Manly. That's a little bit of a Caribbean name, if you're familiar with the Caribbean. So, we giving shout outs to advancements in the Caribbean. So, this guy is from Jamaica. So let me start again. So glaucoma is estimated to affect 3% of Jamaica's population and causes pain, visual disturbances, and even blindness. Today, many persons affected by the disease are receiving relief from a drug developed by medical personnel associated with the University of the West Indies, hence Mr. Manley. So, and it's the Mona campus. So, when I went to Jamaica a few years ago, I always made they always made a distinction to what campus, what part of the University of the West Indies, and what campus exactly you were on. So I kind of picked that up when I was there. So it's the Mona campus. All right, just to be more specific. So the eye drop Canasol was developed after 10 years of continuous and diligent research by pharmacologist Professor Manly West. That's Mr. West. And ophthalmologist Dr. Albert Lockhart, specifically to treat glaucoma. So those two guys, Dr. West and Dr. Lockhart, basically, give a lot of people right now avenue to relieve their glaucoma symptoms. So shout out to those guys from the WI West Indies from Jamaica, and now we're treating glaucoma, and we're having better outcomes. So, and now we have legal marijuana, so it's a little easier to get a card and to actually treat your symptoms. So, thank you to Manly West for his hard work in that area.
Awesome. And definitely didn't want you guys to think that it's only Black history. So even today, African Americans are making advancements in the surgical space. I'll drop a link over an article for a 17-year-old Iowa scientist that actually created some sutures that change color when they're exposed to infection.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Could definitely save a life. Being able to detect infection that quickly in a surgical site. Can you imagine? Like how much antibiotics might be saved or washouts or repeat surgeries?
Yeah, and you could gauge that based on patients leaving the surgical procedure based on how they treat that wound. You would know there's an infection. There's a developing infection. Does it work from visually or is it internal? Is it
From
topical?
what I was able to see from the clip, it was a visual color change.
All right, so you could see it from the outside. You came out the operator, you had your procedure, you went home, you were told to change your dressing and wash once a week or every 2 days. And if you see a color change with the suture, then you realize that you're having adverse effects to either the procedure or the way you're taking care of the wound?
Absolutely.
All right. Good.
Getting better every time. We're also seeing advancements in the way that groups are responding. I saw the American Medical Association wrote a lengthy paper acknowledging the history of racial discrimination inside of the AMA, as well as coming up with a strategic plan on how they were going to address those disparities moving forward. I also saw Joint Commission had a position statement about discrimination in the workplace, as well as contributing to health disparities. And the health HHS.gov also had a website and some videos to help providers understand how they might be bringing bias into the patient care area. And the thing I thought was pretty cool about the HHS website was that it gave tools for patients to file complaints if they felt like any part of their care was being negatively impacted by discrimination. And there was also a link there for if that's happening within employment as well. So the good thing is that we are seeing things like the Americans with Disabilities Acts, title for discriminations come out and have folks be in protected classes. So if you are facing discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, your national origin, religion, your age, or your disability, there are avenues for you to have those complaints taken a look at by federal agencies. And the thing I think is really important about that is having the data, because if people file complaints, you're able to see trends, you're able to see hotspots, you're able to see what issues need to be addressed.
Yeah, and that data is very useful in terms of demographic, in terms of finding the hotspots for certain illnesses, for certain adverse effects of bad practices. So definitely putting that data in definitely helps in the long run. So guys, definitely report to your governing bodies, your inspection agencies as to what's going wrong within your facilities or within your department. So that could definitely help pinpoint some bad practices.
Awesome. And if you if you guys want to see an episode navigating how to submit those types of reports, just drop it in the comments. We're happy to do that. Maybe we can make a little video and outline it for you. All right. So I don't know about you guys. I definitely learned a lot in doing this research. And there was so much more. I mean, we only picked out a handful of contributions, but there were tons. Each person
Yeah.
was involved in so much advocacy, so many groups that were made. They were doing so much work, even outside of just getting their own education and furthering their own careers.
And just let me give some honorable mentions for those other persons who contributed within the medical field. So we won't think we left anyone out. So, which we will anyway, because there are so many.
So much.
So let me get into.
And I think the main thing that I took out of it was that adversity is really never the issue. It's being solution focused and finding a way to get around it, and asking for help from people that support your cause, because none of them did any of this by themselves. They were reaching out to each other. They were networking.
Sure.
And when they found that they weren't being allowed into spaces, they created their own to help each other thrive. So there's no limit to human ingenuity.
And it's not over yet. So guys, anyone with any ideas within the sterile processing field who feel they can improve a process, or they can eliminate waste or bad practices, make certain things better, um, feel free. We have persons within the sterile processing department bringing out tracking systems and new instrumentation throughout the decades, and we still see it growing now. So a lot of the new innovations, the tracking systems, loaner systems, even traveling agencies are being created from sterile processing professionals.
Absolutely. I mean, our episode last week talked about artificial intelligence and programs that are being developed right now to optically train and track these instruments. So innovation is not something of the past. You know, each one of these people at the time that they were creating something new that had not been done before. So I agree. I think it's important to, if you have ideas, start working them. You know, maybe one or two of them don't go somewhere, but who's to say if maybe Patricia Bath threw that piece of paper away that she scrapped on that laser phaco and we wouldn't have that design today?
True. It would have been it would have been somebody else's name on there.
Mm,
It probably would have been invented, but somebody else would have, or she would have probably helped somebody else who had the audacity to actually make some movement with that idea, and it would be under their name. So shout
mhm.
outs to Patricia Bath. Shout out to Frederick Jones, Alice Ball, Hildrius Poindexter, and Coben Bohen. There's a couple of the inventors, and you could look those names up, guys.
Absolutely.
Um, inventors in healthcare or
Yeah, I think
innovators in healthcare.
I think I just want to end by paying homage to all the enslaved ancestors that, were forced to contribute to the medical knowledge of today, but also that voluntarily contributed the knowledge that had been passed down through their own lineages, that obviously have made sweeping contributions that may or may not, ever get the type of accreditation that they deserve, but nonetheless, they were here and they contributed, and we thank you.
So, guys, we're gonna end with a brief minute of the video, and then we're gonna segue into our uh, departure. So we're gonna bring the video back, and we're gonna play a little more, just so you guys have a little more understanding of the Sims era and what actually occurred there.
Say that someone doesn't feel pain. Among other things, you're speaking about their humanity. These are all part of that suite of beliefs emanating from the 19th century that we still have not shaken off, despite all our knowledge and sophistication. They're deeply ingrained.
Doctors like Sims might fit the Dr. Frankenstein stereotype, but they weren't outliers. Historically, Southern doctors who used black bodies for troubling experiments were the norm.
It's a very common question. How can we judge our forebears? You know, those guys in the 18th century who practiced medicine in a way that appalls us today. You know, we think, how could you do that? I did not judge the practitioners based on our own ethics. I judged them based on the ethics of their time. It was not acceptable back then. We just did not hear from the people who protested against it.
After the Civil War ended, the 1900s brought a wave of immigrants to the US. It sparked a race panic and coincided with the birth of the American eugenics movement. One of the movement's key objectives was to reduce the childbearing potential of the poor and disabled. Leaders included birth control pioneer and Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger, who eventually devised the controversial Negro Project, or family planning centers that pushed birth control in the Black South. It was a project that even garnered support from W.E.B. Du Bois, a founder of the NAACP, who wrote that Black people bred carelessly and disastrously. By the mid-1930s, more than half the states passed pro-sterilization laws, and often sterilization was forced. In 1961, future civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer went.
So,
Man.
guys, thank you for watching the show. Thank you for watching the video. Check it out on your own. And guys, we'll see you next week. Alessandra?
Guys, have a good one. We'll see you next Wednesday, and definitely take a look. I know we left off talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, but check it out. There was much more advocacy and work done. So happy Black History Month to everybody that tuned in. We hope you learned something, and drop it in the comments if you did learn something today.
Peace.